Hi everybody, Lynn Cox here, clinical hypnotherapist, rapid transformational therapist, here to talk to you about my favorite subject, and that is of change. What I'm going to do today in this video is chat a little bit about the initial stages of change model. And I want to do this because, if you're considering making some kind of change in your life, be it in your career, relationships, personally, your health, your fitness, you might find that this outline resonates with you and might be able to help you along your way. So I'm reading from my computer here. So the stages of change model, so that's also known as the trans-theoretical model. This was developed back in the late 70s. So this is a time and place where people, it was becoming more culturally common to, let's say, work on self-development. We'll just put it that way. So James Prochaska and Carlo Di Clemente, these are the two individuals who created this theory. And this model is actually still widely used. So, it's all about how people make intentional change in their behaviors. Does it have to do with addiction, health, self-improvement? So this recognizes that change is a process, not a single instantaneous event. But I'm going to talk more about where a lot of people get hung up along the way. So the first stage of this stage that they have created is pre-contemplation. So this would be of the mindset of, I don't really have a problem. There's no problem here. So there's really not intention to change anytime in the near future. And people are typically unaware that the problem exists, or they're denying it exists. So we move along to the second stage. This is contemplation. So this is where those thoughts start to come in, like, maybe I need a change here. Maybe you're in your 40s or 50s and you've been gradually gaining weight, and all of a sudden you're feeling lethargic and you can't climb up the stairs, or clothing isn't fitting you the way that it used to. Maybe it starts to jump in, maybe this is something I need to address. So this is the awareness level. So the awareness that there's a problem. Start to think about the change here, but you're not really all that committed. This is this stage. Maybe you're weighing some pros and cons, or you're somewhat ambivalent. This stage people can linger in for a very long time. So moving on to step 3 of this model, this is preparation. Okay, I'm getting ready to make some change, said change to address said problem. So the intention is to start to take action soon. And this can start with making small changes, like starting a reduction of an unhealthy behavior, or starting to gather resources looking for help. Oh, is there a therapist or a coach who deals with this particular issue? Oh, is there a gym in my neighborhood that I could join? Oh, maybe I'll ask my friends and family or colleagues who have, dealt with a similar issue. Do they have any recommendations or ideas? Next step, action. Number 4, I'm doing it. This is the active change. This is changing behavior, changing environment. And this action stage, according to this model, can typically last up to 6 months. This does require time, energy, and support to sustain. This is important because I'm going to come back to action, as well as step 5, maintenance. Okay, I've made the change and I'm sticking with it. I've stopped smoking cigarettes, or I've shed that amount of weight that I was striving to, or gotten to this size that I've been striving to, or I've, made a change in my career. This is the maintenance level, though. I have changed and I'm sticking to it. And here they state the focus is on preventing relapse and integrating that change into lifestyle. So people in this stage, according to this model, are working to avoid temptation and maintain gains. And then number 6, this is sometimes included, this is the relapse. Oops, I slipped up. I return to the old behaviors. I've lost the gains that I've made in some way. This is not to be considered a failure, but part of the process. And this often triggers people into contemplating what triggered that relapse. Why do I have a perceived failure here in this area? And how can I handle this better next time? So this model is widely used in, addiction counseling and health promotion, dealing with mental health issues and behavioral therapy. And it's commonly accepted because it does emphasize people being ready and also progress over perfection. So I do like that, progress over perfection. But I want to talk a little bit about how humans are averse to change. And this has to do with how we've been wired after hundreds of thousands of years of evolution. To our somewhat still primitive minds, definitely our subconscious minds, change can equal danger. Stepping out of a norm back in our hunter-gatherer days, stepping outside of the circle, stepping outside of a norm that would in any way, shape, or form threaten your position within, let's say, a safe group, a safe tribe, that could result in an impact of not surviving. Also, this is another interesting thing, and this relates to people who struggle with shedding weight as well as eating habits. Starvation was one of the number one causes of death up until just as recently as I believe it was 500 years ago. And unfortunately, in places in our world, people still have issues. People still are struggling with having access to enough food and nutrition to sustain a healthy life. So that's sometimes why people can feel such an impulse, such a compulsion to binge on things, in particular to binge on things like sweets and salts and fats. So here's the thing, when I look at this model and I think about change and I think about all of the clients that I've worked with, as well as people who have reached out to me, and I'm just referring back to here in that number 2, contemplation and preparation stage, looking at, okay, how can I maybe start to change? And then also clients who've come to me really at a point where they say, they've said to me, I've heard this on a number of occasions, a slight variation of this, I've tried everything and nothing's worked. So that they're cycling kind of through in a circle of this particular model, right? Trying something, right? Getting to the place of action. Trying to do the maintenance, but then falling into that relapse. This model of change and a constant cycling, this can really serve sometimes to deflate people, demoralize them in a way, right? It's been this way for this long. I'm too old to make this change. That old adage, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Well, these things are absolutely untrue. And one of the things that keeps people from staying in that chain, number 5, the maintenance, right? The maintenance and not falling into the relapse, is they maybe haven't changed their foundational perspective of who they are, or change those foundational beliefs that are driving the behavior that they want to change. For example, let's go back to the weight loss example and somebody who struggles with binge eating, right? What is underneath that binge eating? What lies beneath this compulsion to eat when not hungry, to be seeking out, sweets and fats, etc.? Or what keeps people back from taking more risk and taking more risk and being more comfortable in sharing their opinions or getting out there in the world and, let's say, public speaking, even just speaking up in a meeting? There's something at the foundation of that. In the case when people struggle with self-esteem, confidence, and a willingness to share their ideas or perspective, that comes from a fear of being judged, a fear of not being enough. And if you go back to the more primitive human, to being ousted by the group, to being judged, to running the risk of being put outside of the approval of the group. And that really kicks up a deep fear in people, right? The risk of not belonging. The risk of not belonging to our subconscious, more primitive minds means this could be deleterious to my survival. So, just having an understanding of the fact that this model of change exists, that it is a process, that it is more about progress over perfection. Every single day that you wake up and it's a new day, it's a new morning, you have an opportunity to make different decisions. So you can fall into that relapse place, but then you can get back onto the wagon, so to speak. I'm not just speaking about addictive behaviors or addictive substances. With anything, with a workout routine, with trying new things at work, with putting yourself out there, with seeking to choose to have a different perspective about how you feel about your life, right? Symptoms of stress, anxiety, depression, and frustration, these experiences do all run rampant across our culture. But you can on an everyday cycle decide to make new decisions and just understand that yes, there's never going to be a place of perfection. I personally believe that human beings are creative people. We're creative individuals, and that we're built to learn and to explore, and to expand. And so depending on what your foundational beliefs are about what does it mean to be me, what am I capable of, what am I here for, what's important to me, like these are all very philosophical questions that one needs to answer for themselves. But depending on your foundational perspective of who you are, that's going to greatly impact kind of how you cycle through this model of change, right? Let's say you're somebody who doesn't hold the perspective that you're of much value or that you're capable of enough. That if you're looking at doing something like making improvements in your business or your career, or making some changes to, take better care of your physical health, right? Somebody with that perspective is going to have a far different outcome than somebody with the perspective of, you know what, I have a lot to offer. I am enough. I am valuable. My life is worth something. My life is meaningful. Depending on those, and there's a whole spectrum in between, right, of people who have a very high, solid degree of feeling that they are enough and valuable versus, the far end of the spectrum of my life is meaningless, or I'm not enough, or it doesn't matter what I do or think or say. Both ends of the spectrum, far different outcomes. But if you also believe, or can maybe try to convince yourself to believe that being human is about, growing, being in community, challenging yourself, contributing, like your value system and your perspective on that is also going to give you kind of extra fuel in the tank to sustain change, to not so easily fall back into the relapse cycle. Because we all relapse, we're all imperfect. That's part of being human is, if everybody had everything figured out and was just in optimal health and performing at 120%, 100% of the time, and had, perfect management over their physiological responses and their emotional responses and reactions. Well, I don't know that would make for a very dynamic human experience. So it's also accepting that we have flaws, we have challenges. Some of us have, propensities to different, we'll say, vices or behaviors or ways. But if you can look at it from the perspective of this model, which is, progress and process, that can help to alleviate then the, how far you crash when you inevitably fall into a relapse cycle or the relapse stage on this whole kind of model of change. That will make it easier for you to say, okay, tomorrow is a new day. I'm going to pull up my bootstraps and just keep on moving ahead. But I just want to leave people with maybe a bit of a more positive perspective that change is inevitable, and you can either try to, you can either kind of flow with it, strike a balance between giving up and kind of being too easy on yourself, because that again is another end of the spectrum, versus challenging yourself and holding yourself to a higher value. When you hold yourself to a higher value, you hold yourself to account more, right? But this is all possible. I've worked with people who have had long-standing challenges, we'll call them problems, according to this model of change, thought that nothing was going to work, thought that there was no way they were going to be able to sustain change for a significant period of time, and have had amazing results, and have tried different things and have had success with different methods at different points in time. But it's always worth it. It is always worth it to pursue the highest ideals for yourself, to pursue desires and interests, to pursue loving relationships, to pursue being healthy and energetic, and to pursue feeling more peace and more happiness and more joy in life. Because it is, we don't ever know how long we're going to be around here for, but it's not for that long. So I hope everyone's having a great day. If you have any questions about change or anything else, feel free to reach out. Bye for now.